Thanks, Jake. And before I start, I just want to say, hey, Jake organizes these things, and he so rarely gets applauded or thanked properly for it, so I want all of you to do that now, if that's cool. It's good. It's good. Yeah. They're really wonderful events, and they absolutely would not happen without him. So, I've never tried the clicker before, we can see how it goes. My talk is called Some Gaming Fiction I Like. Okay, we're going to get started fairly quickly because it's not gaming fiction I love or the best gaming fiction or tie-in novels to games or anything like that. It's just, gaming fiction that I like. And I'll explain a bit as we go along. I've only got 15 minutes and I've got 214 slides, so I'm going to have to go quite quickly. It's not a joke, by the way. So, a little bit more about me. My name is Will Blackstock. I am not that smart. I get to share the stage with a lot of really smart and intelligent people, which makes me feel very lucky. I work as a freelance writer and editor, but I don't do video game stuff. I do business things, and I help with VideoBrains. You probably gathered that from Jake's introduction. You might have met me at the door, perhaps, so I know your names. Obviously, I'll be looking for anyone that doesn't applaud afterwards, and that'd be a problem. I'm a role player and a board gamer. I am also, I do a table talk podcast, which is about role playing and board games with a few of my friends. I'm also a comics geek, and you can follow me on Twitter, and I've run out of space. There's more, obviously, but yeah. Okay, is everyone ready? That's great. Let's go. I'm going to be talking about 3 books today. They're all science fiction books, and I'm going to try and avoid spoilers because I'm hoping you're going to try and read some of them afterwards. The first book is Only You Can Save Mankind by Terry Pratchett. He's most famous for the Discworld series, and the book's dedication is to get another one for Rihanna. And she's his daughter, and now she writes video games. Yes, it's all related to video games, including Tomb Raider and Mirror's Edge. And it's inspired the book by Space Invaders and the ideas and sort of things from Space Invaders, and it was published in 1992. The protagonist is a guy called Johnny Maxwell, and he is the star of a Johnny trilogy, so that's this book, and there's also Johnny and the Dead, and Johnny and the Bomb is the third one. And it's all about, well, a video game, which is called Only You Can Save Mankind, like the book. And so, self-explanatory, you play a spaceship, and you have to save humans from the Squeery, who are aliens. And he's given a copy by his friend Wobbler. Wobbler is a great name, by the way. Everybody should have names like this. Wobbler's the kind of boy who's always picked last when he had to pick teams, and I can relate to that, because that was my life. But he's good at games. They're just not, the games people think are important. And I can relate to that as well, and that's a more positive message, I think. So this brings me to my first theme, which is game skills matter. And in this sense, I've chosen this theme, I guess, because it's I think it's pretty obvious, actually. Our skills, our hobbies can teach us things, and they can teach us stuff like this enormous list I've got that just keeps going, and some games that I've played, and it's taught me some things. It doesn't teach you a sense of humor. I never learned that from games. But the aliens in the game surrender, and that's kind of interesting. It brings me on to my second theme, which is the rules of the game. And it's sort of interesting because video games have rules. We're used to that. We understand that. And if the aliens surrender, the game must have crashed. Right? Because maybe in a civilization-type game, aliens could surrender, but not in a shoot-'em-up. It doesn't make sense. So we're kind of used to that. We understand the idea of video games crashing, but not the real world. You could maybe clip through a wall in a video game and you go, oh, it's just a bug, but not in the real world. And so maybe he thinks he's dreaming, he's having these weird dreams, maybe he's going mad. He doesn't really understand what's happening. And the video game world starts intruding on the real world. Has this happened to you? Well, not in a literal sense. I want to be clear. Nobody's ever... but maybe you've been playing a game like Assassin's Creed or Tony Hawk's or something, and you've looked at a tall building and gone, yeah, I'd climb up there, I'd go like that. That's happened to me. And back in the real world, anyway, he meets this character called Kirsty, which brings me to my third theme, which is related to the theme. Yes, it's all about love. So I'm not going to talk about love in Only You Can Save Mankind, because it's not really in there. But last themes are humour and pastiche. And we all understand humour, I think. Some of us are better than others. Yeah. Okay. A pastiche, on the other hand, a work of art that imitates the style of another artist or period. And these books are not strictly speaking pastiches, but they kind of use the aesthetic and the ideas of some of these things. So, science fiction more generally as well, particularly in Only You Can Save Mankind. There's a little description of the inside of a spaceship up there, and yeah. That bit about Scotsman is, of course, a Star Trek reference. And you kind of need to know that to kind of find it funny. And Space Invaders is sufficiently universal that the book is sort of funny even if you only have a cursory idea of what Space Invaders is. Ditto Star Trek for this thing. Anyway. Pastiche isn't quite the same thing as parody. They're in the same kind of area, and these books don't explicitly parody stuff, or bits of it are kind of parody, and I'd really like to talk about this a lot more, but I don't really have time. Incidentally, by the way, this way of using PowerPoint is a pastiche of a Lessig method, which you should Google when you get home, because I have no time. It's good, though, and it's my favourite way of doing PowerPoint. We're near the end of Only You Can Save Mankind, so there's just the last theme now, which is heroism. And most video games, I think, have got protagonists, and you kind of play the protagonist. Anyway, look, I'm just going to... These are some lies, which I put up on the slides, so just bear with me for a few slides. I'm going there. They do that because it increases your immersion in the game world if you're playing the hero kind of thing. And it's unique to games. Most films, they have a thing, but you don't get to actually control that thing. And video game protagonists are generally speaking heroes, and again, it's lies, lots of lies. It's exciting to be the hero, then, that's why. And so if you write a novel with video game themes, it sort of makes sense for your protagonist to also be a hero, although more realistically, and in this case, they're anti-heroes. And by that, I don't mean like the Punisher, I mean sort of someone who doesn't have those traditional virtues and, has something else. And that's Johnny in a nutshell. So I've introduced my themes, and I'm just going to quickly throw them on the other books, which the second book is Mogworld by Ben Croshaw, who you might know from Zero Punctuation, on The Escapist, and The Little Cartoon Men, The Angry Voice, and Terrible Words. It's published in 2010, and it's about, well, unlike Only You Can Save Mankind, it's not about a person, but it's about, well, not really a real person anyway. It's about Jim, who is a wizard, and Jim lives in a fantasy world, and he dies at the beginning of the novel, but he comes back as a zombie. And he's a video game character, which is sort of different, I guess. He lives in this world called Mogworld, the book's title, and you've probably spotted the theme there. It's a bit like the World of Warcraft, if you've ever played that or have some idea of what that's like. So he's a non-player character, and a fairly lowly and unimportant one, and you get to see stuff from their point of view, which is a bit different. Like, in most games, you don't really think about the NPCs particularly. And anyway, player characters start taking over the non-player character bodies, which they call the syndrome, and it's a bit of a weird thing. Basically, it makes you less effective at the stuff you're doing. Here's an example. There's a character called Drilda, or Dralda possibly, I don't really know. And she sits just like a mannequin. She doesn't move properly. And when she does her attack, her attacks and things, they don't look like people attacking. They're like animations that she kind of goes through in a mechanical sort of way. So really, like, the player characters in this are like robots to the non-player characters, which is an interesting way of flipping this stuff on its head. To the themes, the first film, Game Skills Matter, it doesn't really apply in this because it's all about non-player characters. Sorry, I don't know. So theme 2, rules of the game. Yeah, we'll move on quickly. Yeah, it's interesting because the developers change the game's rules, and it sort of breaks the game's world. And you explain this a little bit. I said Jim can't die; he's a zombie, but neither can anyone else. Basically, when they die, they heal at a temple and they come back to life, which is weird. And it's sort of they call it the infusion, and it's a problem, as you can imagine. Like, yeah. Other human intervention is also a problem for non-player characters. The main antagonist is a guy called Barry, and he sort of gets godlike powers from all the developers trying to fix the problems that they're having with the game. And yeah, it's just a mess for Jim and his friends. Theme 3, love. There's a zombie called Meryl, and she kind of sews his limbs back on at various points. She sort of acts, it's a fairly awkward representation of women in this, and generally none of these books do very well, but she sort of has a crush on Jim, and admittedly, it's more on what he represents than who he actually is. And I can't really get into that. I mean, she's not really a love interest, I guess, and I'm simplifying because I've only got 15 minutes. Theme 4, Humour and Pastiche. It's a pretty funny book, generally speaking. Yatsi's quite a funny guy. And I think it's because it subverts fantasy tropes, makes fun of the silliness inherent to most role-playing games. There's a bit of an anachronism in there, which I quite like. And it's not just sort of massively multiplayer games, it's like other games as well, and there's stuff about playing games, and there's stuff about making games, and Theme 5. Heroism. Jim isn't really a hero, he doesn't really want to be, he just wants to be a protagonist, he just wants to kind of control his own destiny. And he's also an anti-hero, not least because he is a coward and a zombie. Suffice it to say, trying to be involved in the plot doesn't really work out for him. So, the last book is my personal favourite. It's Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. It was published in 2011, and there's going to be a film fairly soon. He's written another book called Armada, which is also coming out fairly soon, and he's announced a sequel, which, if he doesn't call it Ready Player 2, will be something smarter than that. It's about the future, I guess, 2044 to be precise, and it's sort of about this oasis an online world where everybody kind of, people go to school, people have their whole lives out there. It's weird. It's sort of like a giant game in a lot of ways, which is why I'm talking about it. And like all the best games, it sort of has a secret, several secrets. There's an Easter egg in it, basically, put there by the creator, who was a guy called James Halliday. And he's sort of a mix of these guys, or whoever Tarantino is for games, I don't know, I've got probably better suggestions. And he's a massive, massive nerd. And he's a huge fan of 1980s culture. And the Easter egg in question is his fortune, which is worth billions and billions of dollars, because he created this thing which everybody uses. And so the first person to find it is going to get the whole fortune and everything. It's fantastic. And the people looking for the egg call themselves Gunters, Egg Hunters, Gunters. And so the protagonist is one of those. It's a guy called Wade. And his username or avatar name is Parzival, which is a bit like Percival from Arthurian legend, searching for the Holy Grail is the joke. But, there's a limited number of names, and sometimes you end up with a name you wouldn't otherwise have chosen. And so, the first person to find, he solves the first clue in order to help find the egg, and he becomes a celebrity overnight, and he has a whole bunch of adventures I'm just not going to get into. And I'm quickly do the themes and then maybe questions. So, theme 1, game skills matter. Basically, because the egg is so important, finding it, will give millions of dollars. Basically, your game skills and your knowledge, I guess, is more important than your real world kind of skills. So, it's doubly true, if you're a gunter. And his knowledge of 1980s culture is sort of embedded in the Oasis, I guess, because he built it and he loves it, and he grew up in that kind of time. And I guess that's also reflective of Klein, who's a massive 80s nerd himself. And Wade is sort of the same as well, so all these guys have this same sort of thing in common. And yeah, he's able to do well even though he doesn't have any money, because his knowledge is the most important thing. So yeah, he's a fanboy, absolutely. And I think part of being a geek is absorbing knowledge about the stuff that we love, and maybe showing it off a little bit. That's maybe why so, yeah, and it's also, I think, why the talks themselves are engaging, because we're passionate about stuff. I'm going to start using this word a lot at this point. I'm not going to talk about love too much, I do it a little bit, but I'm going to talk a lot about passion, which is related. We connect with that passion, and even if we never actually played these games, I listened to a talk about Majora's Mask last time from Ben Taylor, which I've never played. It was fantastic. And so I'm hoping that even if you've never read any of these books, you're enjoying the fact that I'm passionate about it, even if you can barely string together, what I'm talking about, because I'm talking too quickly. Theme 2, rules of the game. To find the egg, you need to know and sort of understand the rules, and sort of how to bend them, like the secrets, all that kind of thing. Understanding a game intuitively is important, and understanding Oasis intuitively is important to find the egg. But Klein is pretty clear. There's bending the rules and there's breaking the rules, and you shouldn't break them. There's an evil gunter mega corporation called IOI, which stands for something, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but they break the rules in a pretty big and horrible way at various points. So, theme 3, love. I sort of go back and forth in the presentation of love in Ready Player One. I think one of Parsons' rivals is a gunter called Artemis. She's very good, and she has this blog, he reads it, he sort of has a crush on her before they meet, and I don't know, I just sort of get the impression that Halliday didn't really consider the idea of female gunters for his contest. There's a bit where they reenact a film, and you have to sort of play Matthew Broderick's character in War Games, and she kind of says, well, why couldn't I play Ali Sheedy, kind of thing, which sort of a fair point. Anyway, 30 years in the future, and everyone uses Oasis, but a lot of people kind of assume that maybe she's male. And even Wade sort of does it a bit in the book, like he sort of talks about, oh, maybe you're just a fat man in the basement, and I just found that really insulting, to be honest. It's 2044, for goodness sake. Anyway, and he also comes on too strong, like, I'm not going to get into that either, because that's... but theme 4, human pastiche. It's a funny book, absolutely, but I'd much rather talk about the pastiche sort of stuff. So in the same way you need to understand World of Warcraft to kind of get Mogworld, or Space Invaders to kind of get Only You Can Save Mankind, I think you sort of need to understand the 1980s as a whole to get Ready Player One, and particularly 1980s film, which maybe is slightly an anachronistic sort of thing in the sense that it uses 1980s mentality, but it's set in the future. So anyway, I'm not sure. I think a lot of the novel's appeal is in this nostalgia, and there's loads of pop culture references, not just to games, but to a whole bunch of other things, and way more than I could ever sort of cover in a 15-minute talk, or probably a 20 or half an hour talk even. So I'm going to say you don't need to know everything that Klein references to actually enjoy it, because he's passionate about it, and passion is an engaging sort of thing on its own. Theme 5, heroism. I don't want to make it sound boring or dull, but it kind of follows something called the monomyth. You might have heard of it. It's called the hero's journey as well sometimes. If you know what it is, that's great. If you don't, just think of Star Wars. It's more or less like... it's coined by a guy called Joseph Campbell, based on the word in Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. I love Finnegan's Wake. It's the best book I've ever read, but yeah. Smart people have talked about the hero's journey or the monomyth a lot, so I'm not going to do it. I don't have a lot to say about heroism either, to be honest, but I think it's interesting that Wade sort of starts as an anti-hero, but then fits the traditional mold a bit quite quickly. I'm nearly out of time and slides, so the book's message is actually kind of nice. He finds that his quest alienates him from other human beings, and that's sad. And I think we've all had that thing of losing ourselves in a game. I've spent too long playing Skyrim or whatever. Here's what he learns. As terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness. Which is a nice message. So what's my talk really about? Well, it's not about love, it's about passion. And I think it's great these books exist. I think that they've all inspired me in one way or another, you know. And they're powerful tools, I think, that can show off the inventiveness of games, perhaps to people who go, oh, I've never played a game, but I might read a book, you know. And I think video game culture is actually more than just playing video games, absolutely. I believe this quite strongly. It's fan fiction, it's fan art, and it's cosplay, it's remixes or chiptune or nerdcore hip-hop. It's having friendships and relationships with people and laughing and telling stories together. And it's a shared passion we have that exists far beyond the screen. And that's what VideoBrains is about for me. I've met a lot of really fantastic people, thank you to VideoBrains, and that's just the latest bunch of people I've met, thanks to video games in one way or another since childhood. So thank you all for listening. Thank you particularly to Jake for letting me talk about my passion, which is books. And I've got a little bit of further reading for you if you're interested. Player of Games is not explicitly about video games, it's about games more generally. The Web 2027 you probably haven't heard of. It's an anthology of short stories, and it was released in 1999. It has the same sort of vision for the future that Ready Player One does in a lot of ways. And it was very influential for me. I would have talked about it more, but don't really have time. Scott Pilgrim is the comic series that teaches you about love in a lot of ways. Certainly it taught me a bit, and it also uses a lot of video game ideas. If you are interested in the monomyth, you should probably read The Hero with a Thousand Faces. I'd love suggestions for other books I should read. Thank you.